They scheduled the meeting for 3:30 p.m. on a Friday, right between the all-hands culture sync and the forced mindfulness session HR had been peddling all quarter. I knew before I stepped in that it wasn't going to be a promotion. No one gets promoted after lunch. That's not company policy. It's just the pattern. I brought my deck anyway. 42 slides. Every performance metric I'd optimized over the last 12 months, complete with color-coded charts, conversion funnel improvements, and a slide I titled Pipeline Resilience During Belton Events. Green for when I fix things, red for when they didn't let me. They didn't ask a single question. The CTO, a man whose beard had more structure than our org chart, scratched his neck and used the word realignment. Then came cross-functional optimization, then support-facing interface liaison. A title that meant nothing. A title that came with no team, no roadmap, and no authority. They were handing the system my system to Chase Belton. The same Chase who once hotfixed a staging crash by deleting a critical environment variable and thought it was hilarious that it took 4 days to recover. The same guy who once asked if semicolons were just vibes. The HR rep smiled like it was good news. This is part of a broader mentorship opportunity. I smiled back. I nodded. I even shook their hands. Then I walked down 3 flights of stairs and out into the gray Seattle parking lot where my car sat baking under filtered sun. I sat behind the wheel with the engine off, staring through the windshield, watching the world move on like I hadn't just been erased. My laptop sat in the passenger seat, the same laptop that held every iteration of the codebase they'd just reassigned. I opened it out of habit. Slack was still live. My admin access hadn't been touched. DevOps hadn't removed me from permissions. I could still see everything. They'd forgotten the first rule of systems architecture. Check your access logs before you burn the bridges. I closed the laptop and placed it carefully back in my bag. The door hadn't closed behind me. Not really. They left it unlocked. And somewhere deep down, I knew what that meant. I wasn't locked out. I was still inside. He arrived 9 minutes late to the handoff meeting, slurping something neon green through a biodegradable straw. "Morning, Sensei." He grinned, plopping into the seat across from me like we were on the same side of the story. I didn't answer. I just opened the doc I'd been told to prepare the knowledge transfer document, 37 pages long, every section growing more passive-aggressive by the hour. Chase booted his laptop with 17 icons blinking like warnings from another reality. Then he started poking around the repo. By the time I reached page 2, he'd already forked the production branch into a directory labeled Kala Old. No capitalization, no versioning. "Is Jason like, do semicolons matter?" he asked, frowning at the screen. I blinked once. "They're not required, but they also don't belong." He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. That afternoon, he started pushing updates into main, UI tweaks, unreviewed, untested. I watched in real time as the diff logs exploded with changes labeled things like cleanup final, really final 3. He launched a blog post later that week titled Bringing Velocity to Onboarding. I skimmed it over lunch paragraphs of buzzwords, a crop diagram from one of my architecture decks, minus my initials in the corner. The CTO reposted it in Slack. Great thought leadership here. I nodded, took another bite of my sandwich, and opened a private repo on my local drive. I started copying over notes, real ones. Not the fluff I'd been told to document for his benefit, but the truth. The hooks that actually made auto-scaling work. The exception patterns. The one undocumented trick that prevented user session bloat. All encrypted. All mine. By Friday, he was asking what a cron job was, and I was naming backup folders things like family photos, 2016, and cat shots, vet. Not out of paranoia, out of practice. The thing about systems is they don't fail loud. They rot slowly, line by line, while someone like Chase adds confetti to the dashboard and calls it progress. I kept my face neutral when he asked what a sandbox was. Just clicked through to the next screen and kept writing, because I wasn't building for him anymore. I was saving what mattered. I started with nothing. No imports, no presets, no color-coded dashboards. just a blinking cursor in a clean terminal window and the hum of my garage light overhead. The first folder I created, I named Keystone. I didn't plan to call it that. It just happened. A keystone holds weight, connects everything, and stays unseen. That felt right. This wasn't a fork. It wasn't even a clone. It was a rebuild, line by line, module by module, pure, quiet, mine. I kept it offline, away from our cloud storage, away from mirrored backups or logged environments. I hosted the container myself on an air-gapped drive I soldered into an old rig I used to run simulations on before we went public. Nothing fancy, just safe. During the day, I kept playing my role, answered every quick cue with a nod even when Chase couldn't pronounce the acronyms he was breaking. He asked me what async hooks were, then told the product team he was revamping the performance structure with agile responsiveness. I nodded. I typed. I went home and wrote real functions that actually worked. Keystone grew fast like a plant given sunlight after years of shade. I didn't need approval tickets or stakeholder reviews. I didn't have to justify why modular redundancy mattered. I just built. Some nights, I lost track of time. I'd glance up at the clock and see 3:17 a.m., cold coffee beside me, terminal logs still scrolling. But I wasn't exhausted, not like before. This time, the exhaustion felt earned. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Margot, my old lead from DevOps, who once called my exception-handling poetry that crashes gracefully. Keystone wasn't a secret. It was a sanctuary. Meanwhile, back at the office, Chase pushed another untested feature into production. It added drop shadows to the login screen and broke 3 dependencies in the process. He called it brand evolution. I just watched. And then I went home, opened my terminal, and added another line to Keystone, not to fix theirs, to build mine. The blog post showed up during a Monday stand-up casually linked in the Slack thread under Team Wins. The title made my stomach tighten before I even clicked streamlining legacy onboarding. I knew that phrase. I coined it. He'd taken my architecture diagrams, months of process mapping, edge case testing visual logic chains, and uploaded them in a JPEG cropped tight to remove my footer and initials. There was even a photo of him pointing at a whiteboard I'd filled out during a late-night debug sprint. He was smiling in the picture, mouth open mid-sentence like he understood what he was saying. He didn't. The comments lit up with emojis. Leadership. This is gold, Chase. I closed the tab. An hour later, I found myself in the kitchen reheating a stale veggie wrap when Donovan, the VP of engineering, strolled in with his phone and a bottle of something cold-pressed. He barely looked up when he said it. You know, maybe you were never really senior engineer material. It wasn't cruel. It was casual. Like he was commenting on the weather or the open floor plan. Just an offhand observation between bites. I stood there with a plastic fork still mid-air lettuce, wilting in the microwave's glow, and let the words float past me like static. I didn't argue. I didn't blink. That night, I encrypted a second full backup of Keystone, zipped it into a container named Althea 2023, and stored it on a separate drive. Double fail-safe. If I was being erased, then so be it. But I wasn't going to disappear. Then I pulled out a number I hadn't used in 3 years, Lucy and Dar. CTO at LedgePoint. Brilliant, brutal, allergic to fluff. He once called my API caching method almost obscenely elegant during a panel. I sent him a message. Are you still looking for a clean onboarding core? I might have something. The reply came 20 minutes later. Just 2 words always. Curious. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, the cursor blinking in the corner of my encrypted terminal. They could crop me out of pictures, but they couldn't rewrite what I built. By Wednesday morning, staging was crashing twice a day. No one could figure out why. The Slack thread began politely seeing some weird latency, and by lunch had escalated to full-blown panic. Chase, in his usual way, decided to add visibility, which translated to dumping uncompressed logs into the main storage bucket. Every event, every click, every whitespace character rendered in real time with payloads and user metadata intact. The logs alone ate into production memory. Support flagged the first critical at 11:12 a.m. onboarding PDFs, rendering blank. The next one, 15 minutes later, reported duplicated client entries. Chase marked both as non-blockers. By late afternoon, new users couldn't complete onboarding. The form builder defaulted to null fields. The client name placeholder started appearing as undefined on welcome packets. They kept pinging me. Hey Cal, a weird one here. Mind taking a peek? Quick cue, do you know if the password reset logic was handled server-side or via token? Pretty sure you wrote this part. Any insight? I let the messages sit. I archive them without reply. No reaction, no read receipt, just silence. I wasn't on that team anymore. That's what Donovan had said, out loud, in front of 3 other people. I remember the exact cadence of his voice. Cala's responsibilities are strictly support-facing now, like I had simply aged out of relevance. And yet, here they were. Chase even tried a casual DM. Hey, think the server's throttling. Or is this like a legacy thing? I didn't answer. I copied the exact phrase legacy thing into a new note in my private log. I timestamped the failures, traced the commits, and ran parallel test simulations on Keystone. No errors, no leaks. Their system buckled under the weight of its own performance theater. I sipped my tea and watched a new alert slide into my inbox. An old safety ping from a script I wrote 2 years ago buried in staging now, screaming silently like a smoke alarm in a locked room. I didn't reply to that one either. I just tagged it in my archive folder and kept working, because the cracks weren't mine to seal anymore. They chose their structure. I was already rebuilding something better. Keystone ran like a dream, fast, modular, frictionless, no bloat, no branding fluff, just lean logic humming in perfect sequence. Lucian's team ran the first test builds in a clean sandbox I'd configured the week prior. Their feedback came back with phrases I hadn't heard in years: elegant architecture, tight failure handling, reliable under pressure. One engineer even sent me a GIF of someone applauding in a server room. I didn't react, but I saved it. That week, I started drafting the license agreement, exclusive, non-transferable, bound with an IP clause so tight their legal department would need dental floss to breathe near it. My old firm wouldn't just lose access. They wouldn't be able to replicate anything remotely similar without triggering an automatic suit. Lucian connected me to a quiet, competent counsel named Renee, who reviewed my draft and made it sharper. We added a timestamp clause. An originality attestation. I covered every angle, every loop, every possible pivot they might attempt after the collapse. Back at the office, the internal platform was sputtering. Support threads swelled with user complaints, and the product team had started recycling Chase's design posts like they were life rafts. Someone tagged me in a public channel. Kala, quick eyes on onboarding. You built the last stable path right. I opened the thread. Read the messages. Then replied flat and brief. All inquiries should go through legal. No emojis. No sign-off. I muted the thread. Then I ran Keystone's passive logger one final time. Its job was simple: observe, not intervene. Just watch every malformed response, every faulty redirect, every time their system called a deprecated endpoint and broke something it never understood. I built it to witness, not to sabotage, because I didn't need to twist the knife. They were doing that themselves, line by unchecked line. That night, I compiled a mirror log of every failure they'd blamed on legacy logic. It wasn't spite. It was documentation, proof of structure. And when the final clause was signed and Keystone stood ready, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, steady, and I knew exactly where I'd be when the countdown ran out. They called it launch day, but it looked more like a pep rally in startup drag. Chase wore a t-shirt that said code, deploy, dominate. Someone queued up a playlist titled Launch Vibes Only. The office lights were set to cycling hues. Stickers, lattes, little banners taped to monitors like victory had already been declared. At 7:00 a.m., the platform went live. At 7:03, it began to bleed. PDFs rendered blank. Client names appeared as undefined. Onboarding spinners froze mid-flow. A junior rep flagged the first critical ticket, and within minutes support was buried in duplicates timeouts, stale data overwriting fresh leads. One dashboard showed a 3% completion rate. By 7:08, Slack started hemorrhaging. Why are user IDs mapping backward? Client just got someone else's welcome packet. Does anyone know if the staging patch went into prod? Who built this? And then, where's Kala? I wasn't there. I was sitting in a corner booth at Miller's Diner on Fifth Hood, up sunglasses on a mug of burnt coffee in my hand. The waitress, bless her, didn't ask questions. She just kept pouring like she knew I was mourning something no one else could see. My phone buzzed every few seconds. Slack was on fire. Mentions, DMs, emails forwarded, escalated, retagged. Brendan had posted a fire emoji in response to a bug ticket. Someone else tried to roll back, but the legacy version had been overwritten last week in a cleanup push. They were trapped inside a house they'd designed without an exit. At 7:32, a junior dev pinged the CTO, "We can't trace the failure point. There are 6 patches nested. No one knows what Chase changed." I took a slow sip of coffee. Not smug, not angry, just watching the tide come in. I didn't need to gloat. The system was already speaking louder than I ever could, and Keystone was untouched, waiting, running test cases on an isolated node just in case. The waitress came by and slid the dessert menu toward me, celebrating something she asked. I looked at the screen again, 97 unread notifications. Not exactly I said, but I think someone else is about to learn a lesson. At 7:47 a.m., I flipped the switch. Keystone's passive logger kicked into archival mode, quiet and unseen. It didn't intercept, didn't interrupt. It just listened. Every bug they introduced, every broken endpoint they touched, every malformed token, every redundant call to deprecated handlers. It logged timestamps, response codes, blame trails. Meanwhile, Chase posted another update in Slack. Looks like some legacy logic still hanging around. We're working on it. Legacy. He meant me. The same logic that had been stripped out, overwritten, misnamed and rebranded with gradients and confetti animations. Now it was his scapegoat. I took a screenshot, then another, then the thread where someone said, "Can we roll back?" and the VP replied, "It's gone. No backups." Brendan said we didn't need them. I sipped my coffee and saved the images in a folder labeled Audit Fodder. I wasn't building a case, I was preserving a memory. A system can forget who wrote it, but failure remembers the fingerprints. Then my email pinged. One new message flagged high priority. Subject line, contract executed. Keystone onboarding license. I opened it slowly. The signatures were there. Lucian's legal's mine. Every clause I'd negotiated, every protective wall I'd built, every usage lock. The exclusivity was real, enforceable, and active as of that minute. Keystone was no longer a secret. It was a product, a platform, a firewall between competence and collapse. Lucian's firm would launch with it within the quarter, and my former employer, they couldn't mimic it, license it, or touch a single pattern without risking a lawsuit sharp enough to cut their roadmap in half. Slack buzzed again. Internal users can't access onboarding unless they're in admin mode. Who changed the auth logic? Why is the PDF template showing source code? I didn't answer. I flagged the messages, archived them, and muted the channel. Somewhere across town, I imagined whiteboards being erased mid-sentence and executives pacing hallways with their earpieces, hissing feedback. Someone would scream eventually. Someone would demand my presence like I owed them a rescue. But I had already left the building weeks ago. And now I had the only key, the inbox filled like a dam under pressure, subject lines stacked in tight formation, urgent, time-sensitive. Can we speak? The sender names blurred into one desperate voice. HR VP Product Support Ops, even the CTO himself. One thread read, re-onboarding rollback option. Possible recovery. Another need clarification. Legacy handler, can we talk today? And then per legal, we need confirmation on original code authorship. Please advise. I didn't answer any of them. Not until the 6th email from HR marked urgent and CCing legal affairs. That one got a response. Subject NDA clause availability, body all further contact should be directed to legal. Regards, Kala Remmer. I hit send and closed the tab. The waitress returned with my slice of cherry pie still warm, the crust barely holding its shape. I thanked her with a nod, took a bite, and let the sugar and citrus cut through the dull ache in my chest. Not sadness, not regret, relief. The sun was just starting to crest over the rooftops. The light slid across the window like a clean deploy. I watched the reflection of my phone buzzing beside my coffee. Slack notifications, dozens of them. One message preview flashed briefly. Kala, if you're seeing this, please, we just need to know if the original token structure is recoverable. Then it disappeared behind another. I didn't touch the phone. At 8:04 a.m., their internal dashboard collapsed again. A public thread appeared in their support channel, major outage, onboarding flow redirecting to blank auth loop, escalated to tier 1, need a fix ASAP. Someone tagged me again. I archived it, silently. Then I looked up and saw the city stirring. Delivery trucks, joggers, someone unlocking a bike rack across the street. Life moving forward, unaware that across town, an entire department was realizing too late that trust isn't something you can overwrite with version numbers and confetti. I took another bite of pie. Not for revenge, not for proof. Just to mark the moment that the system let go of me and I let go of them. The only thing left now was launch. The notifications looked different this time. No fires, no panic, just success reports quietly stacking in my inbox metrics, clean and sharp onboarding times, under 90 seconds PDF packets landing formatted and signed. The first client had gone live on Keystone overnight, then a second, then 5 more before noon. They weren't loud about it. They didn't post launch hype on LinkedIn or queue up a playlist. They just did the work. Quiet, competent, effective. I opened the dashboard, my dashboard, and watched the flow in real time. The logs were light. The APIs behaved. The structure held. No gradients, no quirky tooltips, no misplaced branding. Just data moving through rails I'd built exactly the way they were meant to run. For the first time in years, I didn't need to hold my breath while the system did its job. I scrolled through client notes. One line stood out, "Onboarding feels invisible. That's how we know it's working." I smiled, just a little. There were no signatures to chase now, no calls to return. The contract was live, the system licensed, and the chaos I'd left behind had nothing to do with me anymore. Lucian had already looped in a dedicated deployment team. All I had to do was step aside and let it breathe. I logged off, closed my laptop, left my phone on silent. I stood by the window for a while, watching the trees bend slightly in the wind, the world humming at a speed that didn't require me to sprint. There had been so many versions of me tucked into every line of code I wrote, tired, unseen, focused, stretched thin, then finally free. Keystone wasn't a project anymore. It was proof that I wasn't wrong, that my standards weren't too much, that I didn't imagine the difference between noise and architecture. The system didn't need me to hold it together anymore, and I didn't need anyone's permission to leave. So I did. Quietly, cleanly. I finally quit the job I was never allowed to walk away from. And this time, no one could take the code with them.